The first night it began, the air was colder than the mountain wind had any right to be. Radios crackled with voices that weren't on any station, murmuring phrases too fragmented to belong to the living. The fog had swallowed the roads by dusk, wrapping around houses until even their own windows became mirrors of white. In that stillness, something moved, slow, deliberate, unseen, leaving only the faint static hum echoing through the walls. Dogs barked and fell silent mid-howl. The lights flickered in unison, as though something vast had brushed against the town's electric pulse. No one dared to speak of it, yet every face showed the same dread, the same realization that the quiet wasn't empty at all. Something was listening. Something was answering back, and each night it crept closer. By the second night, the fog no longer waited for sundown. It drifted in at noon, blanketing the town with an unnatural chill. People whispered that something was knocking, not just once, but over and over, on every door, left unlatched. Each knock came in threes, slow and patient, and when answered, no one stood there. Some claimed to see a faint outline in the mist, something tall enough to scrape the awning yet motionless as stone. The sheriff tried to calm them, but even his porch light flickered when dusk came. In the silence after the knocks, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for someone foolish enough to invite it in. When the television turned on by itself, it showed nothing but snow. Yet within the static, faint impressions began to appear. Faces blinking slowly, watching from the void. Their movements weren't random. They followed whoever stood before the screen, turning their gaze with chilling precision. One resident smashed her set, only to hear the same whispering bleed from the shards. Others unplugged every outlet, but the static hummed on through their walls, pulsing in the rhythm of breath. The fog outside pressed closer that night, as though drawn by the signal, waiting for the moment when the watchers would step through. Someone heard it first, a low hum under the floorboards, rhythmic, almost like chanting. Then came the scraping, the desperate pounding from below, muffled cries clawing at the wooden planks. People gathered outside, too terrified to enter the house. The air reeked of damp earth, and as they watched, the ground seemed to pulse, breathing in time with the noises below. No one dared to lift a single board. The sheriff finally broke through, but beneath the floor was nothing. No crawl space, no pipes, just cold, compact soil, freshly disturbed and faintly warm to the touch. By the week's end, half the town had fled. The ones who stayed behind claimed they couldn't leave. The fog circled the valley like a wall. No cell signal, no radio contact, no sound at all. Only the silence, thick and alive, pressing against their ears until they swore they could hear their own hearts stutter. Then, on the seventh night, the silence broke with a single whisper, carried on the wind. It spoke each of their names, slowly, lovingly, as if tasting them. The doors all opened at once, and whatever had been waiting stepped inside. At dawn, the fog thinned just enough to show the outline of the radio tower on the ridge, its steel ribs slick with dew, its red light dead. Yet, through the hush, a signal began again, faint but constant, whispering the same phrase on repeat. Those who listened too long said it wasn't words at all, but breathing, matching their own until they forgot which was which. The few who climbed toward the tower returned wide-eyed, mumbling about shapes moving within the mist, following their footsteps, but never leaving prints. As the sun tried to break through, the fog rolled backward, revealing that every window in the town now faced the ridge, glass panes slightly ajar as if waiting to hear the next breath. By the second night, no one slept. They sat in their houses, staring into the fog as if hypnotized by some unseen pulse. The hum beneath the floor returned, deeper now, vibrating through furniture and bone alike. When anyone blinked, they swore they saw someone standing just outside. Same silhouette, same tilt of the head, same impossible stillness. Then one of them vanished mid-sentence. The only trace was the echo of their last breath, held inside the room like trapped smoke. Those remaining began to whisper prayers to no god they remembered, for dawn no longer came cleanly. Only a sickly gray glow that revealed less each day. The townsfolk began marking the hours with candles, desperate to track time as the sky lost its color. But at exactly one point each night, the world seemed to vanish, sound, light, and motion ceasing all at once. Those caught outside in that silence never returned. Inside, clocks froze mid-tick, and reflections disappeared from mirrors. Some claimed the fog wasn't a thing at all, but a moment stretched thin, a time that consumed itself. When the world resumed, chairs were overturned, candles extinguished, and the smell of wet soil filled every room. No one knew what the fog took, only that it always came back hungrier. The televisions turned on again, but this time they didn't show static. They showed the town, not as it was, but as it used to be. Streets alive with people who no longer existed, faces smiling in the same houses, now empty. When anyone approached the screen, the images paused and stared back, lips moving soundlessly in warning. Some swore they saw themselves inside, walking past the camera, unaware. Then the footage shifted, showing real-time reflections of the viewer. Only the fog behind them was moving closer in every frame. The watchers understood then. Whatever had come through the static was learning how to take their place. By the week's end, the fog had seeped into the walls. Paint blistered and pulsed in slow rhythm, as if the building itself were alive. Those who stayed could hear whispering through the plaster. Not words, but imitation, the cadence of their own voices speaking sentences they hadn't yet said. One man pressed his ear to the wall and whispered a question. The wall answered it before he finished asking. Then came the sound of breathing, deep, steady, perfectly synchronized with his own. The town had become a lung, and everyone within it was simply helping it breathe. When the fog reached the tree line, it began to whisper. The sound came not from above or below, but from every direction at once, repeating fragments of voices that once belonged to the missing. Each phrase carried emotion, sobs, laughter, pleading, blending into something almost melodic, a siren song beneath the wind. Those who listened too long felt their heartbeats synchronize with the rhythm of the trees, the pulse of the forest. At night, distant lanterns glowed among the trunks, moving like will-o'-wisps. No one dared follow them, yet by dawn, footprints always led toward where the lights had been. Each trail ended abruptly, as though swallowed mid-step. One of them heard her own voice calling from the woods. It wasn't just similar, it was identical, echoing the exact words she'd spoken moments before in the cabin. The others froze as the copy repeated itself, this time with subtle changes, as though learning tone and rhythm. When they blocked their ears, the voice shifted to the radio on the shelf, whispering her name with mechanical tenderness. The fog outside pressed harder against the windows, vibrating with each syllable. Then came the tapping on the glass, rhythmic and polite, perfectly timed with her own panicked heartbeat. Something in the fog wanted entry, and it was speaking in her voice to ask for it. They gathered near the old logging road, hoping fire might drive the mist away. Flames crackled bright for a moment, pushing the fog back in rippling waves. But when the light dimmed, the silhouettes around the campfire multiplied. Each figure mirrored their movements precisely, lifting cups, turning heads, even breathing in sync. No faces, only shapes sculpted from haze. Then, without warning, one shadow leaned forward when none of them did, staring into the flame as it whispered something unintelligible. The fog thickened, and the real fire sputtered out. When the smoke cleared, only half the circle remained human. From somewhere deep in the valley, an old melody began to play, a tune no one could place, yet every heart recognized. It drifted through the fog like a lullaby half remembered from childhood, slow and mournful, carrying with it the scent of rain and metal. The survivors followed the sound to an abandoned church. Its bell tower split and leaned. Inside, a tape recorder sat humming, reels spinning though no tape remained. The song came from nowhere, echoing off the pews as shadows gathered in the aisles. Each note grew fainter until silence returned, and when they stepped outside, the fog had taken the path they came from. That night, the last working radio came alive again. But this time, the signal wasn't words. It was a low hum, deep enough to make the floor tremble. When slowed and replayed, the sound revealed something almost like breathing, followed by whispers, repeating coordinates that led into the woods. The fog pulsed with each syllable, its rhythm matching the hum. The remaining few understood then that the signal wasn't coming through the fog. It was coming from it. They watched as the dials turned on their own, the frequency rising like a heartbeat, racing toward a climax, until the speakers cracked and fell silent. Then the breathing continued inside the room. By the time the fog began to take form, the survivors had stopped calling it fog at all. It clung to walls and drifted through windows like breath condensing into flesh, shaping features that should not have existed. Faces emerged, unfinished at first, pale outlines floating in the air. Studying their originals with hollow fascination, they moved in silence, imitating gestures with uncanny accuracy, as though trying to understand what it meant to be. When one figure reached forward, its hand dissolved halfway, only to reform moments later. The real townspeople huddled together in the corners, whispering prayers that the things outside would forget them. But the shapes were already mouthing their names. The knock returned at midnight, 3 times, slow and deliberate. When the door creaked open, a familiar figure stood in the fog. It looked exactly like one of them, down to the smallest gesture, the faintest tremor of the hand. But its eyes were wrong. They reflected no light, absorbing everything instead. It spoke in a voice that trembled between echo and mimicry, repeating phrases the original had said earlier that day, testing the sound of them like a new language. Behind it, the fog pulsed in rhythm with each syllable. When the door slammed shut, the echo didn't stop. It continued speaking from inside the walls, promising that soon they would be one. The mirrors began to betray them next. Reflections lagged behind real movement, then started performing gestures the originals hadn't made. One leaned closer to study its reflection, and the reflection smiled first. The glass trembled, rippling like water, until a faint breath fogged the surface from the inside. When they covered the mirrors with sheets, the fabric shifted, shapes pressing outward as though the reflections were still trying to crawl through. Every mirror in the town began to hum softly, vibrating in unison with the same frequency from the radio. Something was learning how to cross over, one reflection at a time. It wasn't long before breathing itself became uncertain. Sometimes they inhaled and the air didn't feel like theirs. The fog had begun to sync with their rhythm, drawing in when they did, exhaling seconds later. The shapes around the house now mimicked the motion perfectly, as if the entire valley shared a single lung. One survivor tried to hold their breath, but the fog responded with a hiss, pushing into every crack in the cabin until their lungs burned. When they gasped, the fog sighed in satisfaction. Every inhale now felt like an agreement, one that could no longer be undone. By the 4th dawn, the fog no longer waited outside. It knew them now. Their movements, their voices, their very patterns of thought. When they awoke, one of them was already standing at the window, watching the mist swirl with familiar eyes. Only when it turned did they realize it wasn't their companion at all, but something wearing that memory like skin. The imitation smiled, soft and patient, and whispered a phrase only the real one would know. Then it extended its hand, its surface rippling like water under moonlight. "It's all right," it said. "You don't have to breathe alone anymore. By the 5th night, the town no longer kept its shape. Streets folded upon themselves, looping endlessly like veins beneath pale skin. Buildings shifted when unseen, windows swapping places, doors leading to rooms that shouldn't exist. The survivors wandered through familiar roads that bent into new geometry, a landscape rearranging to hide its truth. When the fog rolled in, everything became a mirror of its own shadow. The air felt denser, heavy with memory, each step echoing as if tread on hollow ground. They realized the town wasn't being consumed. It was rebuilding itself from what it remembered, one fragment of human fear at a time. They took shelter in a large house at the town's edge, though none of them remembered it ever being there. Inside each room was an echo of another, endlessly repeating with subtle differences. A chair missing, a clock reversed, whispers that grew louder upstairs. The house hummed softly, alive and aware, its walls trembling with breath. One of them claimed the house was dreaming, that they were inside its sleep, walking through the moments it had stolen. When the front door vanished and a new staircase appeared, the truth became undeniable. The house wasn't offering them refuge. It was remembering them too. They found a library filled wall to wall with cassette tapes, each labeled with a person's name. When played, the tapes didn't contain voices, only sounds of breathing, footsteps, or sobbing in the dark. One tape crackled to life with the voice of someone still alive, whispering the listener's own thoughts back to them, word for word. As the fog crept through the doorway, the tapes began to play themselves, hundreds of overlapping murmurs filling the room until it sounded like the town itself was exhaling. They covered their ears, but the sound vibrated through the bones, a chorus of everyone who had ever entered the mist. At dusk, the fog parted to reveal a procession moving through the town square. Figures walked in perfect silence, lanterns swaying in their hands, their faces masked by pale cloth that seemed to breathe. Each figure looked identical, and each bore the same slow, deliberate smile. The survivors hid, but the parade moved with impossible precision, stopping before each building as if acknowledging the souls still inside. When one of the survivors dared peek from a window, every masked head turned toward them in unison. The fog deepened, the lanterns flickered, and the march continued, footsteps fading into a rhythm like a heartbeat that belonged to no one living. By dawn, no one could recall their own names. Memories bled like ink in water, blurred, fading, replaced by echoes. The fog now hung thick and low, whispering identities into the ears of the lost. They began repeating the words, unsure if they were lies or truths. The town's streets no longer aligned with any map. Its church bell tolled, though no one remained to ring it. As the final echoes faded, the survivors understood they were not trapped by the fog. They were the fog, scattered across time and memory, their bodies dissolved into the place that once was home. The valley exhaled, and silence reclaimed its breath. Months later, a small group of travelers found a road that wasn't on any map. It wound through the mountains like a scar, fading in and out beneath thin sheets of mist. At its end stood a wooden sign half buried in weeds, the town's name scratched away by something with claws instead of hands. No birds sang here. No insects hummed. Even the wind held its breath. They followed the path in uneasy silence, guided only by curiosity and the faint hum of something electric far ahead. When they finally saw the valley below, it looked like a photograph faded by decades. Frozen, untouched, and waiting. The town greeted them in whispers. Empty houses stood with their doors open, furniture arranged as if someone had just stepped outside. A single radio played softly in a diner, the melody warped, skipping on a loop. When one of the travelers spoke, their voice echoed back too quickly, like an answer rehearsed. Dust hung thick in the air, but no footprints marked the floor. The silence had weight, pressing into their lungs, making speech sound foreign. They found photographs on the walls, faces half faded, eyes scratched away. Beneath the glass, the moisture had condensed into shapes that almost resembled fingerprints. They found the radio tower still standing, though its cables had fused into the ground like roots. When powered on, it emitted a low, steady hum, a frequency that stirred the fog even from miles away. One traveler leaned close to the speaker, insisting someone was whispering on the other side. Another recognized their own voice, warped and distant, speaking words they hadn't yet said. The hum deepened, the metal of the tower shuddering as static bled into a slow rhythm like breath. Then came a faint laugh, identical to one of theirs. They shut the radio off, but the laugh continued, carried on the wind. That night, the travelers made camp at the edge of town. The fog rolled in soundlessly, curling around tents and vehicles like smoke drawn to breath. One of them vanished mid-sentence, their voice dissolving into a whisper that circled the others. Shapes appeared in the distance, familiar shapes, mimicking the travelers' postures with aching precision. Every movement echoed back a fraction too late, as though the fog were studying, remembering. When one called out, the shapes replied in perfect unison. A chorus of mimicry rose through the valley, not threatening but mournful, as though the fog itself longed to be alive again. By dawn, only 2 travelers remained. The fog had thinned but carried a strange warmth now, like breath brushing against their skin. In the streets, their reflections lingered too long in broken windows, smiling when they did not. One picked up an old photograph lying in the road. A group of faces, blurred but eerily familiar. At the center stood someone who looked exactly like them, captured in an era long vanished. The other traveler whispered that maybe the town never disappeared at all. Maybe it simply remembered too vividly. As the fog rose once more, the photograph pulsed with static, and the reflection in the glass finally blinked. The remaining travelers returned to the tower at sunrise, determined to destroy it before the fog consumed them completely. Yet as they approached, the air thickened with a pulsing rhythm that matched their heartbeats. The metal seemed to breathe, its surface slick with condensation that shimmered like sweat. A low hum radiated outward, vibrating through the earth beneath their feet. The closer they came, the louder the hum grew until it formed words, not from the speakers, but from the structure itself. The voice spoke in all their tones at once, layered and broken, repeating a single phrase. "We remember you." The tower's light flickered, and the fog began to rise again, coiling around the base like muscle awakening beneath. Skin. Any. Cow. In you. K. Tune. Skin. Ka. Tie. They tried cutting the power, but the cables bled light instead of sparks. Every instrument on the control board turned on by itself, dials spinning, needles slamming against glass. The hum rose to a pitch that rattled the fillings in their teeth, then dropped into a slow, steady pulse. One of them realized it wasn't a signal at all. It was a recording of a heartbeat, magnified across the valley. With each pulse, the fog shivered, taking form, drawing in breath. The tower wasn't transmitting the fog, it was sustaining it, and when they looked to the horizon, they saw hundreds of smaller lights flickering through the mist. More towers, more hearts, all waking up together. The fog surged inward, flowing through the open doorway like a living tide. In its folds, brief flashes of light revealed scenes. The town as it once was. People laughing, windows bright, the air free of mist. But the images warped quickly. Faces melting into static, voices twisting into screams cut short. The travelers realized the fog was a memory, trying to replay itself, looping fragments of a past it couldn't let go of. When one of them reached into the haze, their hand dissolved briefly into light, revealing veins of flickering static beneath the skin. They pulled away, trembling. "It doesn't destroy," they whispered. "It remembers too hard." They broadcast one final message, a warning carried on every frequency the tower could reach. Their voices overlapped, trembling but clear, pleading for whoever might listen to stay away. As the fog climbed the tower, the sound warped into static, then into laughter, then silence. The red beacon atop the mast blinked once, twice, then went out. For a moment, the entire valley stilled. Then, faintly, from 100 miles away, another radio crackled to life, repeating their message perfectly. Same cadence, same tone. But none of their voices. The fog had learned to speak for itself. When the fog finally settled, it left behind nothing but silence. The town was gone, replaced by a field of glassy soil reflecting the gray sky. No footprints, no sound, only the faint hum beneath the ground. Like the earth itself was still dreaming. In the static between radio frequencies, the world moved on. But sometimes, late at night, listeners claimed to hear breathing, hidden beneath the white noise. Soft, rhythmic, almost human. And if one listens long enough just before sleep takes hold, a whisper can be heard. "We remember you." Then the signal cuts out, and the silence returns, patient and alive.